As Democrats struggle to get their hands on the president's tax returns, the New York Times has obtained the next best thing, tax transcripts, and they show a very different financial picture of President Trump than the self-professed mogul has projected. The tax transcripts are from 1985 to 1994. These are IRS-generated summaries of the information in President Trump's tax returns for those years, and they show that Donald Trump's businesses lost more than $1 billion in a decade. That's more than nearly any other American taxpayer year after year. CNN's Tom Foreman is here to explain all of this to us. Walk us through it.
This looks less like the art of the deal and what we see in the New York Times, and more like the art of the disaster. Look at this loss piling up year after year from 1985 to 1995. This is the money that Donald Trump was losing as he published Art of the Deal, as he said over and over again, oh, it's all going well for me, I'm doing great financially, when in fact, these records suggest he was losing a ton of money out there, so much money that during this period of time, 8 of the 10 years, the Times says he didn't pay any federal income taxes. Now, he was able to stave some of this off, according to the Times, by acting as a corporate raider for a period of time, acquiring shares of companies with borrowed money, then using his publicity and fame to go out and say, oh, you know, I'm thinking about buying this company to try to get other people to push the price up, and then quietly selling things off. This apparently, according to the Times, worked for a while, but then people got wise to it and said that's just a bunch of bluster and a bunch of fake out there that they're trying to get people to pay and prop him up with money. There's also in 1989 this almost $53 million in interest income that seems to emerge from nowhere, according to the Times. So all of this paints, as you noted, a very, very different picture of Donald Trump than what he paints of himself. And the response from the White House has been fairly simple. He said real estate developers in the 1980s and 90s, more than 30 years ago, were entitled to massive write-offs and depreciation, which would, if one was actively building, show losses and tax losses in almost all cases, much of it non-monetary, sometimes considered tax shelter. On and on it goes, basically saying all of this was standard, everyone was doing it, it was perfectly fine. But then at the end he says, but this is a highly inaccurate fake news hit job. So I'm not sure what to make of that, Bree. That's a little like the lawyer who says, my dog didn't bite you because my dog is kept in the yard and I trained my dog not to bite. And by the way, I don't have a dog.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. Tom Foreman, thank you for taking us through all of that. Let's talk to Richard Pomp. He's a tax expert and the former director of the New York Tax Study Commission. He's also a law professor at the University of Connecticut. First, Richard, I want to ask you about that depreciation explanation that the president gave in his tweet. That wouldn't explain losses, would it?
Well, it could. In this case, it does not.
Why not in this case?
Well, let me just explain depreciation. You buy a building and you're entitled to deduct a certain amount of the purchase price of the building every year. And you offset that against your rental income. Keep it simple. And if your depreciation is greater than your rental income, you will show a loss from that building. But when you sort of look at the amount of the losses and you ask yourself, well, how much must the building have been to generate this amount of depreciation? It just doesn't make sense. So there's more going on here. That mystery interest income, it's probably a recharacterization of something else in order to minimize taxes. I mean, we need the underlying schedules that are attached to the tax returns. And that's why he is fighting so bitterly against releasing his tax returns. At this point, what does he have to lose, at least for these years? But the answer is because there's something in the details. The devil's in the details. Who's really supplying money?
But who's really supplying money? And I want to ask you about that because so you think this $52.9 million in interest income, am I hearing you right? It may not actually be interest income, right?
Yes.
That's what okay, so when you look for that same year, 1991, you look at Fred Trump's earnings, because he actually did earn that year. His earnings were $53.9 million, $1 million more than the interest income. Does that raise any questions to you? Is that a possible coincidence?
Well, the interest is being paid on a loan, presumably, from Trump to someone. And I doubt he is lending money to the father. He's a borrower, not a lender. So
no, but that the father, you don't think the father was lending to him? Or you can't?
If he was lending to him, then the interest would be paid by Trump to the father, and it wouldn't be received as income by Trump.
Okay.
So there's something else going on in that year. It diminishes subsequent years. Something's funny about it. We need to look at the schedules. And that's why New York, it looks like New York's going to turn over the New York State income tax returns to Congress. But the New York State returns has the federal stuff as an attachment. And my guess is the president will move to keep those attachments from being turned over. So that's probably not a panacea either.
Can I just ask you, is there anything that raises a red flag for you when it comes to whether something is legal or not?
It all raises a red flag because the bigger your losses, the less tax you're going to pay. So it all raises an issue as to were those losses real or were they really manipulations for tax purposes? Again, we can't answer that from the transcript. We need the underlying return and schedules, which is why he is fighting so hard not to turn those over. Where is the source of all this money coming from? Is it someone, a Russian wealthy person doing some money laundering, as has been suggested? What is really going on? We just don't know. We know that certainly the fortune made by the father was passed on in basically tax evasion on the estate tax. That the October New York Times report made pretty clear. So this whole fortune is built around tax evasion. The family's not a stranger to that. His sister, who was a judge, was starting to be investigated on the estate tax issue. And you notice what she did?
Yeah,
she resigned.
She stepped down.
Yes.
Richard Pomp, I have to leave it there with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.